start the recording officially, which I should have done before, but this is going to be recorded as it is an official Senate meeting. Professor Diana Macri is our recording secretary, so she will take official Senate minutes, and then these will be approved at the next Senate meeting, which is going to be a doozy. And since I have everybody's attention here, for the faculty, starting, I believe, tomorrow, the ballot will open for the at-large P and B positions that are available. All the departments that don't already have a representative on there, an at-large representative, their candidate will be on the ballot, and the eligible full-time faculty will be voting. And we're going to get that done in the next, it should be online tomorrow. So how is this going to work? We received over 100 questions, anonymously as well as named. I organized them into broad categories because there was a lot of overlap. The categories are budget, enrollment strategies, pedagogy, faculty/student/staff support, reopening the college, and consultation. I sent a selection of each category to the president and his cabinet, as I said I would in my meeting, so that they had an expectation of what to expect in this meeting. They don't know what I'm going to ask or who I'm going to call on. And so if they needed to do any background research, they could do so. Because obviously the goal here is full and informed answers. I wanted to thank the people that submitted all the questions. The union did a great job in actually organizing their questions according to categories, which mimic some of the categories I have. So that was incredibly helpful, and they were really thought out questions. As I noted in my email, the first half of the town hall is prioritized for those that pre-submitted questions with names attached to them. And then I will call on those people by name. They will ask their question, sticking to the script that they pre-submitted. The president will answer to the best of his abilities, and then those individuals will have a chance for follow-up. The second half will be more free-flowing, and I'll recognize people from the floor as they raise their hands. I'm going to make sure that all the categories that I noted get equal time, because across the board, everybody submitted questions in bulk for each category. And lastly, this is a formal Senate meeting, so the rules of decorum and order apply. Wait to be recognized. Keep your questions to the point. And in terms of decorum, we comment on policies here. We don't comment on people's motives or personalities, et cetera, et cetera. Lastly, everybody in the meeting, please locate the participants button and click it so that you see the list of participants in this meeting. Now that you've done so, click the blue raise your hand button. Everybody click the blue raise your hand button. Okay. Remember, you click the participants button, at the bottom of which you should be able to see a blue hand. You click that, and then you're able to visually raise your hand. And the hands are shown in the order in which they were raised. Now, for those of you on the phone, like actually calling in, the only way I can do this and maintain order, I've already given out Professor Tram Nguyen's email, which I will repeat. This is just for the people on the telephone that have no video whatsoever. trnguyen@hostos.cuny.edu. Send her an email with regards to technical difficulties, but also when we open the floor to questions from the floor, send her an email and say you want to be recognized, and then she'll just have to text me this information as we go. This is the best that we can do to try and get everybody in the meeting and trying to get all the voices heard, but we're up to 209 participants. So with that, let me just find my sheet. Mr. President, do you have any further commentary, any further additions before I start? And are you even, did I mute you? I may have muted you. All right. I'm going to lower all the hands. Mr. President, if you can just raise your hand so I can find you and unmute you. Great. And do you need to accept it? Nope, you are unmuted.
No, it's unmuted.
Excellent. So, sir, there may be some background noise in your office. So periodically, if you can, you may have to mute yourself while you're listening to others. For everyone else, when you're unmuted, ask your question and then please mute yourself so that everybody could hear you. As I mentioned, there's a variety of categories. I want to start off with the budget. So I'm going to call out the people that sent in budget questions with their names attached to them. And then I'm just going to rock and roll and figure this out as I go, try and get everything covered. So the very first person I'd like to call on is Professor Lizette Colon, who submitted a budget question. Professor Colon, could you please use the raise your hand so I can find you immediately and unmute you? Excellent. Professor Colon, you should be I'm sorry. Are you unmuted, Professor Colon?
Yes.
Please, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, President Gómez. I have the question here in the college, especially because the 15th is around the corner and a lot of the adjuncts are very concerned. So the question that we submitted was the following. Also shows a very healthy projected end of the year reserve, 3.3 million, as per the 2019-20 mid-year financial report. That is more than all the other community colleges except for BMCC and more than many of the senior colleges. Also, there are reports that some CUNY administrators are taking and or considering a pay cut. So the question is the following. How is the college planning to spend the reserve funds and stimulus money to avoid premature cuts and layoffs? And what percentage of that budget goes to salaries for staff on the executive compensation plan? And how much is the college planning to cut salaries for staff on the ECP to ensure all employees are maintained on payroll and are able to keep their health insurance during the pandemic? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Colon. Would you mind repeating the actual question? You got a little bit fuzzy in the midst of your delivery.
Okay, so the question is, how is the college planning to spend the reserve funds, which is 3.3 according to that report, and stimulus money to avoid premature cuts and layoffs? And the second part was, what percentage of the budget goes to our salaries of staff on the executive compensation plan? How much is the college planning to cut salaries for staff on that level? To ensure that all employees are maintained on payroll and are able to keep their health insurance, which is the main concern right now of so many, especially the adjuncts and the part-timers, the health insurance during this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Colon. And stay tuned for your follow-up, okay? President Gómez, please, you have the floor.
Okay. To answer the question in order, I think all of the funds that are available, including the funds coming through the CARE Act, are on the table to cover whatever the ultimate budget gap would be. So, I mean, the first order of business for me is to thank the SVP and her staff for putting us in that position, that a college like us is in the same category as BMCC and much larger institutions. But that having been said, the great unanswered question is what the ultimate budget allocation is going to be from the state and the city. And that has been unclear. So until we get the final budget numbers, we are hoping that the impact will not be as great as it will be on other colleges, but I can't answer it specifically. As to the ECP, my numbers are that the ECP constitutes about 3% of the college's operating budget. Currently, we've reduced that by 12% because there are 2 vacancies that are currently frozen. One is the Dean in Academic Affairs, and the other is the ECP position in Student Affairs. So that went into effect even before the official directive came to the college. As to cutting the salaries of ECP staff, that is something that is the prerogative of the Board of Trustees, not of the college. So I know from my discussions with my colleagues and from my discussions with Dr. De Filippis that the college and the administration are committed to do whatever is necessary to keep this institution solvent and in as strong a fiscal condition as we possibly can. But again, until I know exactly what the budgets, plural, from the state and the city will ultimately be, it's hard to answer more specifically than that. So I hope I covered all of your questions.
Thank you, excuse me, President Gomez. Professor Colon, you hang on, let me do it. Sorry. Accept the unmute, Professor Colon.
Yes.
There you go, you have the floor.
Yes, I'm glad that you mentioned that, and it gives us a little bit more reassurance. But there are two follow-up questions that maybe you can answer specifically. Will top administrators at Hostos and CUNY pledge to reduce their salaries by 10 to 20% before eliminating people from payroll? And how much did our college administration save by not being physically open for 3 months? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Colon. President Gomez?
Again, I am not given to making pledges over which I have no control, so it would be a hollow promise at best. The Board of Trustees has the authority to reduce the salary of top administrators, especially in ECP positions. So I think if that is the direction that the university is forced to go in, then certainly they have the authority to do that from the president on down. As to the amount of money that was accrued during the closing, we didn't save anything because, as you may or may not know, in April, we received notification from the city that we had to reduce our budget by $2 million. So all of the accruals, and with some of the help from the university in terms of monies on things like energy, et cetera, went to cover that year-end cost. That was a $2 million reduction in essentially the last 2 months of the college's operation. So again, as I said to the opening question, I think all of the dollars that are available, CARES Act money, reserve, or anything else that might become available, are in play for the purposes of covering any budget shortfall that we have moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Professor Gomez. Professor Tram Nguyen, Vice Chair of the SEC, in addition to Professor of English, submitted a question on the budget specifically. Tram, would you like to ask it now? If so, raise your hand so I can find you. Actually, I did find you. I'm going to unmute you. Just accept it. You have the floor.
Thank you. Professor Gómez, excuse me.
I am
Just go with first names.
Thank you.
You have said that you have missed being a professor. So President Gómez, I have felt a great deal of reassurance in the meetings you have taken with the SEC during Hostos in the time of Corona. Forgive the English pun. I thank you for these gestures of consultation and transparency, which is also demonstrated with this town hall. So to that effect, in the spirit of collaboration, I would like to know what funds have been reallocated or retracted in order to make the targets that QD has handed down to us with the $2 million cut. How much has been diverted to pay back the money, and what are the plans to afford the $2.6 billion in 2020 and 2021?
Again, as we discussed in our SEC executive committee meetings, And as I've been discussing with the chancellor, I think all of the dollars that are currently available, whatever accruals we have, as I said, we've frozen those 2 ECP positions. How much money will be available from that? What will be available for reducing OTPS? What will be available in terms of any enrollment declines that we have? You know, I'm not trying to avoid answering the question. There are 2 pieces to this. One is, what will our revenue be come July 1 when the fiscal year begins? And what will our budget allocation be? And that's going to be made up of all of the dollars that are currently available. On the CARES Act, for example, that money is not within our control. We have to submit a plan to the university to the state, showing that we are in compliance with the federal mandate for those dollars. So there's no guarantee that we'll get the full $3+ million in that allocation. If the city decides to reduce our budget again, then that reserve, which we're looking at 3.3 million, could become half that or less in very short order. And if in August, when all of the dollars have been assessed, we get any reductions either from the state or the city, you know. So the short answer is, I know that the governor and the chancellor and the mayor are fighting very hard to get any and all dollars that we can from the federal government and hopefully reduce the budget deficits that exist at the state and the city level. There is nothing that is going to be taken off the table. As we've discussed, this college is founded on the principle that people come first. Our faculty, full and part-time, our staff, full and part-time, and most importantly, our students. That is going to be the priority, and we are going to do everything within our power to ensure that that happens. What the budget will be, we will find out in very short order. I think that's the question that we all need answered to be able to move forward.
Thank you. Professor Nguyen, do you want your follow-up? I believe. Go ahead.
I can hold off on it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Gómez.
I'm going to ask Professor Felipe Pimentel, who asked a question which was similar to Professor Nguyen's follow-up. Professor Pimentel, could you please use the raise your hand function if you are in this meeting? Okay. You are unmuted, sir. You have the floor. I can hear you. The president can hear you. You did submit questions to me by email last week, sir. You have the floor.
Did I read both questions or one at a time?
Please read both questions, and then the president will answer, and then you have the opportunity to follow up on his answer.
Okay. The first question is, why the Office of Academic Affairs is proposing to cut the release time for coordinators who assume administrative functions that are essential for the proper management of many departments? Are you aware that most faculty at the college would not assume those responsibilities without incentive? That's the first question. And the second question is related to adjuncts. Would Hostos Community College be willing to give priority in hiring those adjunct faculty who depend on their jobs at Hostos to keep their health insurance coverage, and not the one who have other full-time jobs outside CUNY?
Thank you, sir. Mr. President.
Okay. Again, and I have shared this with the Executive Committee of the Senate. I will share it with all of those who are participating here today. I am fully aware that these reductions, if they come to pass, and that's the operative term, if they come to pass, will have a devastating effect on college operations, that it is a disincentive for anybody to do work for which, on top of their other responsibilities, and will fall largely on the administration, both in academic affairs and all of the other offices, to pick up the slack. The hope is that it never comes to pass. If it does, and we are forced to take such draconian measures, then we have much bigger problems and a much broader discussion that has to take place in terms of how we handle it. As long as I have been here, I have always operated with a very conservative rollout of the budget. We never commit everything up front. Admittedly, this is an extraordinary extension of that practice, but these are extraordinary times. So the short answer is yes, I am aware. I hope we do not have to do it. But if the budget is as bad as some of the prognosticators are suggesting, then we need to be ready to implement these steps immediately. As to prioritizing adjuncts, we would have to look at who those adjuncts are within the scope of the existing agreement and what we could and could not prioritize. There is always, and not just for adjuncts, but for all part-timers, the non-teaching adjuncts, as well as college assistants and others, the hope that we will be able to retain people and make them whole. So I cannot say that we will prioritize an adjunct not knowing the specific circumstances of their appointment and what our contractual obligations are to the 3-year adjunct, to the 1-year adjunct, to someone who is working, for example, at part of our clinical rotation. It's not a simple yes or no answer. The spirit of your question, I think, is what is at the forefront of all of our thinking. Everybody is vulnerable, and we need to do whatever we possibly can to protect the most vulnerable, who are our adjuncts and our part-timers. But I think it would be disingenuous of me to suggest that we could prioritize a particular group of adjuncts without having all of the specific information surrounding their appointment.
Thank you, sir. Felipe, Professor Pimentel, excuse me, a follow-up?
Yeah, very short. First, we just elected Professor Alongo as chair, and I don't see how he can manage all the responsibilities that we have in the department without the assistant or the coordinators. Huh? He's already very committed, but I understand perfectly the logic. I'm more concerned with the second question. What is happening, and you're probably aware, is that in many colleges, provosts are sending memos indicating that we need a cut of about 35% of the adjunct labor force. And of course, I understand the contractual question. Now, the people who have 3-year appointment are protected. They're going to be rehired. But the question are people who maybe are not in that situation. People who depend on their job, especially in terms of the health insurance. One possibility, and I'm going to propose that I am a member of the PMU department, and I'm going to propose that to the chair, is to keep, we can make assignment only of 2 courses, not 3 courses. We may have to find some equity in terms of how we distribute the courses if this cut happen, okay? The professionals of the union, well, we are in principle against the cuts, but I think locally we may need to negotiate some of this cut. And one way to address, it's just a hypothesis, would be to, instead of giving to some adjunct free courses, maybe we have to limit the assignment only to 2 and try to cover as many adjuncts as possible, especially those who really depend on the health insurance. Okay, thank you very much for your interesting and.
Thank you, Professor Pimentel. President Gómez, would you like to respond?
Yeah, look, I know that we're not in disagreement. Just for your information, part of my review from the time that this started has been going over what our teaching coverage has to be. And even with some of the the cuts and adjustments that I have proposed in terms of release time and everything else, what the provost has confirmed for me is that with our full-time faculty, if everything that I have proposed has to come to pass, we will be able to cover approximately 700 sections of the 1,200 sections we normally offer in the fall. So, which begs the question, who is going to teach the other 500? So the true dilemma for us as a college community is going to be, if we are blessed by having a robust enrollment in the fall, and we run 1,200 sections, but I can only cover 700, then the adjuncts, whether they're the 3-year appointments or not, are going to be needed in order for us to provide that coverage, irrespective of any efficiencies that we get. So the question is going to be, if I have to cover 1,200 sections and we get, because I'm not going to get it, the college gets a substantial cut, how are we going to make payroll? Because those faculty have to be in the classrooms, or virtually or otherwise, and those students have to receive instruction. So, either way, I think we're all caught on the horns of a dilemma, not the least of which is the chancellor himself, who is fully aware of how precarious a situation we're in.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to go to the list of anonymous questions that were not tied to an individual. I'll ask them in not rapid sequence, all at once, and then you can comment on them. And for those that don't already know, our chancellor was recently appointed to a mayor's task force on essentially getting the schools back in order post-COVID, which is great for CUNY. We'll have certainly somebody in there making it clear that we need the money. So, Mr. President, a couple of anonymous questions, which gives you an opportunity to talk about broader context. The first one was, the college budget is approximately, and again, I'm just reading it straight, so you may have to correct some of these numbers if they are incorrect. The college budget is approximately 80 million with millions of discretionary dollars, bracket, incoming federal money, close bracket. The college community should have a big picture of the budget and not just the cuts, 3 million out of 85 to 90 million, and not just the 3 million specifically. So if you could talk a little bit about the broader, fixed, unchanging expenses we have, and et cetera, et cetera. The other very specific question was, will we get our July step, and / will staff be furloughed? And I think that gives you the opportunity to talk about the process through which faculty and staff would have to go through that. So, sir, the floor is yours. I do not have a follow-up. I just wanted to ask the anonymous questions that were submitted.
Okay. Well, the college's budget of approximately $80 million includes, it must be $25 million in fringe benefits. So those dollars are not available for reallocation or redistribution. So the actual monies that are available for the college's use are 55 million, of which 80% is made up of personnel salaries. And this is where, when we start looking at these dollars, it becomes tricky. The questions that have been posed, and rightfully so far, have been, how do we protect our faculty? How do we protect our staff? How do we ensure that we serve students? If the cuts exceed any discretionary dollars that we have available, and again, we toss around monies of $3 million in reserve, possibly 3.6 in CARES Act dollars, et cetera, et cetera. If the cut is 7 million, then irrespective of what dollars are or are not available, you're still $1 million in the hole. So I think until we know what any, and again, I'm praying that we don't have any cuts, but I am a realist at the end of the day. And, you know, if you read the papers, you know that something unpleasant is coming. How unpleasant is the question that needs to be answered. So again, I just wanted to clarify that it's not an $80 million budget. If you take out the fringe and the special program allocations that come into the college for things like ASAP and other initiatives, you have relatively little that we would want to cut if we accept the fact that the 80% on the PS is what we are trying to protect at all costs. So I understand the need for a greater vision. I lose a lot of sleep at night worrying about that vision and looking at those dollars. I'm waiting for the proverbial shoe to drop to see where we will land. I'm hoping that with the efforts of the union, the chancellor and everyone else, and the mayor and the governor, if they can prevail on this latest round of stimulus dollars, that it will not be anywhere near as bad as we fear.
And sir, could you just comment on the steps that would be involved for releasing contract faculty and contract HEOs? You did talk about this in the SEC, but I think others would benefit from knowing the process.
Well, first of all, let me say that in none of the meetings that I've participated in, locally, within the sector, that is community college presidents that meet, or the council of presidents and the chancellor's executive staff, has the discussion come up about furloughing, about any of the things that I have been asked about. But for those of us that survived the fiscal crisis of the mid-1970s, you should be aware that there is a provision that is very specific. I mean, we just cannot, either administratively or by CUNY mandate, begin to lay off people. The policy 5.19, which talks about the steps necessary to make those kinds of reductions, are very specific. It requires consultation first between the president of the respective institution and the governance bodies, plural, a proposal, a detailed proposal that goes to the chancellor for his consideration and approval. The chancellor would have to submit that to the board of trustees for their approval, and then it would have to come back to the campus in consultation with the PSC, the governance bodies of the college, to begin to implement. And again, I haven't been involved in this at this level ever, but certainly since the 1970s. And that itself is a protracted process that would take, you know, well over a year, possibly as long as 2 years, before any action can be taken. So the notion that, you know, come July, if doom and gloom falls, that people are going to be furloughed is not something that I have heard discussed at any level. And again, with the caveat that the furloughs of the 1970s were predicated on a state of financial bankruptcy by the city of New York, when both the 2 and the 4-year colleges were under the jurisdiction of the city. And as those of us know that were here, there were protracted grievances, lawsuits, and appeals over the years. But the shutdown of the city was a matter of financial emergency because there was no cash. I have not heard any scenario, even the worst that has come across my desk, any scenario that speaks to that. And if somebody has, then please share that with me, because it did not come from the chancellor and it did not come from me.
Thank you. Let me take this opportunity for those of you that had follow-ups that you did not already submit in writing. Please note the actual wording of the follow-up and email to me. You have my Hostos email so that we can record everything accurately in the minutes. Sir, Mr. President, I'd like to move to enrollment strategies now. And we are technically supposed to go to 5. I'm going to ask for everyone's patience and let's just stay on this because we've got a lot to talk about. But we'll talk about it at 5 o'clock. So I'm going to call on Dalis, excuse me, a member of the executive committee, a HEO, as well as in the union. She has some questions she pre-submitted. Dalis, could you please raise your hand so I may unmute you? You have the floor.
Thank you. Hello, President Gomez. I had 3 questions I wanted to ask you. The first is, what is the enrollment committee strategy for enrolling students for the summer and fall semesters? The second is, what is the status of enrollment for the summer and fall, and how many students have actually enrolled? And what's the college's engagement strategy for supporting students over the summer and into the fall? Thank you.
Okay. All right. To date, well, let me take them in reverse order. The status of enrollment for the summer and fall, and I've also had a conversation with Provost Cruz, the university provost, is kind of a series of mixed messages. That is, the numbers as of this date, both for new enrollments for the fall, for registrations for the summer and the fall, are within percentage points of what they were last year. However, as I reported to the Executive Committee of the Senate, I did ask the VP for Student Affairs and the staff to follow up with students to see what their intention was in terms of registering for the summer and the fall. And the students had, many of them had indicated a reluctance to return given the current circumstances. So, you know, until we are able to answer the fundamental questions, and I put those questions as follows. Are we going to be employing distance learning for the fall? And if so, will we complete the semester in the fall under a distance learning environment? How will that look, and what are the consequences for the students? What will be the student experience in that? I think will be in part the drivers for what those numbers will look like, both initially and in terms of retention and persistence. Right now, I think the strategy has been to do as much outreach as we can to students. The provost has, I will be personally reaching out, as will the staff, to encourage students to re-enroll in the fall. The summer may be a bit of a challenge given the tremendous financial hit that so many of our students have taken. And if there is a reopening, all or in part in this city, all indicators are that the students' major priority will be to get back to work to support their families. So I think we're going to have to balance how we reach out to students, how we support them to the extent that we can, and that we employ the emergency dollars that the chancellor has been able to raise and that we have been able to raise to support students during this transition. Those that have taken such a major hit, understandably, will redirect their energies to their family first. I am reluctant in uncertain financial times to commit any dollars to advertising or additional costs for outreach. While it is important and it may turn out to be counterproductive, you know, I do not see how in good conscience I can increase our expenses when we're just trying to struggle to get through. So we will be employing the normal outreach strategies through admissions, both centrally and at Hostos, through following up with our student success coaches and the other advisors, and encourage students to return, try to assess, as we are, how many students are going to be employing the credit, no credit option, what the consequences are in terms of financial aid, and try to address this on multiple levels. As for, what is going to actually happen, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I know what the metrics say. I just don't know what the metrics mean. If we look at the numbers say that we should be roughly where we were last year at this time and will be in the fall. Whether behavior will follow is an unanswered question.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to follow up with some, I'm sorry, Dalis, do you have any follow-up comments, questions? Sorry, do you have any follow-up questions or comments, Dalis?
Yes, thank you. Just one, I wanted to see if you had the numbers for how many students were enrolled at this point for the summer.
I don't have those at my fingertips, but I will get them to you.
Thank you, President.
Mr. President, just to follow up using some anonymous questions that were sent out. Well, two-pronged question. The first one was, would it be fair to assume that we're doing everything in our power to not only retain the students that we have, the stop out students, getting them back, advising them to register for the fall, but also actively going after the students in the high school applicant pool that are now, everyone's going after those students. Would it be fair to make that assumption based on the resources we have? Because that's no extra money. That's just using the people we have.
No, when I say we're employing our traditional strategy, that's exactly what I mean.
Okay, thank you, sir.
The question is going to be those students in high school who are themselves going through some extraordinary circumstances, and how responsive will they be? They did file an application, many of them, and we will try to encourage them to complete the process. But as you all know, historically in community colleges, community college students tend to do things rather late in the cycle. So we won't know until very late what the ultimate outcome will be.
That was a perfect lead in to my final follow-up on this, and then we'll move on to pedagogy. This is literally from an anonymous question. Hostos is concerned about declining student enrollment, yet at the same time, it is drastically reducing class offerings for students, making classes tentative in CUNY first. How can we retain students if we reduce the options for them to take the classes they need to graduate? And this is done within the context of, we all know that students register in late August and sometimes after the official beginning of the school year. So I think the question is, what is the thinking behind that move, considering the culture of Hostos and student behavior vis-a-vis registration? You have the floor, sir.
Well, the goal is not to reduce the classes, is to reduce our exposure in terms of multiple and parallel sections that may not fill, or that fill with 5 students and then ultimately would have to be canceled. The hope is, and I've had this discussion with the provost, who has shared with me both the approach that she's taken, and frankly, it's not inconsistent with what we've done in the past, although again, I keep saying, this is much more aggressive than we have been in the past, and I am being much more conservative than I have been in the past in terms of what we make available. If the enrollment is there, the sections will be there. As I said, if we have 1,200 sections that are going to be offered in the fall, And we're going to need virtually every full and part-time faculty member that we have, then, you know, those sections will fill and we will move forward. We have always had courses either in reserve or tentative based on enrollment. The provost has shared with me, and we talked about this in the executive committee, you know, looking at approaches, including, you know, running up the limits and then splitting the sections later to reduce, you know, issues of class assignments and all of the other things, classroom assignments that complicate putting a section on. And I trust her to do that efficiently. The greater question is, what will we look like in the fall? And I think I will credit my colleagues in the union who have raised this in a number of forums. That is, if we have to practice social distancing and we have a campus where, to the best of my knowledge, we have one room on the 5th floor of the B building that will accommodate more than 30 students, how do you run a class, 30 students engaging in social distance with a facility that can only accommodate 30 students?
Mm.
I think the answers to these questions are going to depend on what we will look like in the fall. What will the class sizes be? How are we going to manage in a safe and responsible way, having some presence on campus in this era of, you know, the COVID-19 epidemic? So, you know, I know that there's a lot of disagreement about whether or not we should be this conservative and assume the worst, but I think the consequences of going in the other direction and assuming that everything is okay and it's not are far greater. And that falls entirely on me.
Thank you, sir. Okay. So let's move on to pedagogy in the interest of covering as much as possible. And in this particular case, most of the questions were in fact anonymous. The first one is, so I'll take them myself. Why is the college pushing an asynchronous model of distance learning? And for those that don't know, asynchronous is an online course where there is no obligation for the student to be at a certain place on a computer at a certain time. The student completes the work at their own schedule. Why is the college pushing an asynchronous model of distance learning? Anecdotally, faculty who have held synchronous collaborate meetings on Blackboard with students this semester are reporting stronger retention and student engagement. This means there's an actual face-to-face like we're doing on Zoom, but on Blackboard Collaborate. Statistically, we know that asynchronous courses have poor retention and completion rates. Why would the college discourage faculty from connecting with students with the limited tools we do have? So, sir, I'll let you respond to that, and then I'll ask you the next one, which is in the similar vein.
Okay. Well, the operative term there is pushing. We're not requiring. And I think for those of us, and many of you have shared this with me as well, this new era has created all kinds of challenges for our students. And I had this conversation recently with the provost. Students who are working, who are first responders or essential personnel, students who have children at home and have to support them in their instruction, since the DOE requires that they sign on a regular basis to verify that they're attending classes. Students who have to share a device with their children who are going to school. So through no fault of their own, the circumstances for our students have changed as much as they have changed for us. So the spirit there is to encourage faculty to be as flexible as possible. You know, the story the provost has shared with me a number of times and I think is kind of emblematic of what we can end up doing, is, you know, a student who is working in a hospital, taking a final exam in a supply closet, because they're working, and, you know, they are essential personnel. So, you know, while that's kind of a dramatic image, I think far less dramatic but very real are the day-to-day circumstances that our students find themselves in. Again, our fondest hope is that we can all return to whatever normal is going to be in the future. And I would not engage in a debate as to whether synchronous or asynchronous learning, the statistics surrounding it. I will respect the views of the faculty. I would just ask that we consider the dilemma of the students as well. And where those things do not align, to think about solutions, whether it's the final exam, whether it's recording the session that a student cannot attend so he or she can view that lecture or that discussion, or an alternate time for a final exam, to think about ways that we do not deprive students of valuable instruction, again, because of circumstances beyond their control.
Thank you, sir. This will be an issue that the task force will take up, and purposely, we do have the incoming SGA president on there. Because, and I, in my many roles at the college, I'm speaking as a faculty member now, the face-to-face is critical for retention. But you have to be flexible with the students' work, home life, internet connection, etc. Okay, I'm going back to chair now. Okay, why, this is the second question, sir. Why is the summer certification process for distance learning so cumbersome? I'm reading the question as written. Why is so much pressure being put on faculty to complete so many hours of training on top of teaching their spring 2020 courses online, as well as other responsibilities? The curriculum itself does not model good pedagogy, and frankly, it is a concern to our experienced teaching faculty. I've altered the word to concerned in the interest of maintaining decorum. So, sir, you have the floor.
Okay. I'm assuming the question is, why is it so cumbersome?
Yes.
Right. In my discussions with the provost, I mean, the dilemma is a very simple one. None of us expected to find ourselves in this situation, and hoping that this would not be extended into a new semester. So we have the competing concerns of providing professional development, support, and certification for people to, both the students to benefit from and the faculty to feel comfortable with distance learning in a very short period of time, with the looming prospect of a fall semester that may very well at least start with distance learning as the instructional modality. I don't think anybody wants to do it this way. The question is, how do we address a concern that has been universally expressed by students, faculty, and staff in a time frame that is impossibly tight, without the kind of lead time and planning and discussion that we would all have liked. So I will accept at face value that it is cumbersome. I will accept at face value. I know for a fact that faculty have multiple responsibilities, and this is a challenge for everyone. I just don't see, unless we make a concerted effort to accelerate our professional development in this area, how we are going to be substantively different in the fall than we are right now.
Thank you, sir. I think the question is phrased within the context of other CUNY colleges are going through the same thing, and their models of training and certification are a bit more streamlined and possibly paid, not paid, I'm not sure. But ours is quite rigorous, but I am speaking anecdotally now, but that is the context of the question. But again, I go back to the task force that I mentioned, which will offer some recommendations as necessary. The final question in pedagogy, I want to turn to Professor Slav Dushenkov. Sir, if you're here, could you use the blue raise your hand function so I could find you? Okay, I don't think Professor Dushenkov is in the meeting. So I will read out his question, which is very specific to the sciences and teaching online, which I think will be applicable to a number of our faculty. This is Professor Vyacheslav Dushenkov in the Natural Sciences Department. One of the major challenges for, oh, there he is. I don't want to take, Slav, you are unmuted, please.
All right, thank you very much. It's a fascinating meeting, and I do understand all the challenges that we are facing and the answer for uncertainty. However, I would like to add one more uncertainty to that. Moving to the full online training of our students require also moving online and distance learning the labs. And the labs for such disciplines as natural sciences and or the allied health are essential part of training. The moving fully online will be extremely challenging, require additional rethinking of all our approach to that. And even if possible, it will take a lot of efforts and sufficient funds. So is there any strategy within the college to address this issue?
Thank you, Professor Dushenkov. Just hang on in case you have a follow-up. President Gómez, if you wouldn't mind answering that question, both within the context of natural sciences, but also the clinics in allied health, because you see where the question is going, and how are we meeting the face-to-face lab certification clinics, et cetera, that are now needing to go online, especially as, for instance, dental hygiene, and nursing, there are certifications statewide that needs to take place.
Okay. To answer the question of the resources, this is, and I have researched it, one of the permissible expenditures under the CARES Act. So when we talk about what we will need in terms of software and resources to conduct instruction directly related to this pandemic, I am confident that this is one of the things that is clearly stipulated, and we should be able to secure the resources. Professor, you will forgive me, I have said a number of times privately that my degrees are in English literature and in organizational theory. So I am not qualified to comment on any specific software packages or requirements. But I think to Professor Yolongo's point, the issue of instruction, both in the clinical areas and in areas that require lab sciences, is something that I know that the provost has been working on, because with the clinical areas, in any of the allied health, we need to not only be able to address the concerns locally, but we have to meet the requirements of the accreditation bodies. And that, to me, is the more critical issue. So the short answer is, we will need to do whatever the accreditors require of us. And I believe that the resources under the stimulus package will allow us to do it. As to the specific steps that will be required at the departmental level, I would defer to the provost in terms of the logistics. And again, I don't want to soft pedal this as if this is going to be easy. We are working on this as the information becomes available. But this is one of the rare cases where I am less concerned about the resources than I am about our ability to come together as a faculty and implement appropriate pedagogical interventions.
Thank you, sir. Professor Dushenkov, do you have a follow-up? You may unmute yourself, I believe. If not, let me do it for you. You have, do you have a follow-up,
Yes,
sir?
thank you. No, I don't have follow-up. It's understand that the transition will be extremely difficult, and we will have to address it on the basis of information and funds available.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, sir. All right, now I want to move on to faculty/students/staff support. The first person I'd like to call is Professor Craig Bernardini, the incoming chapter chair of our union. Professor Bernardini, could you use the raise your hand function so I may unmute you? You may be on an iPad, which is always hard.
Oh,
there
I
you
am,
are.
yeah, but I'm unmuted
Okay.
now.
Excellent. Professor Bernardini, you submitted a question. You have the floor, sir.
Great, thank you. Hi, President Gómez. So junior faculty have expressed concerns about the reappointment and tenure process for fall 2020. For newer faculty, time for acculturation of the college community has been severely impacted by the disruption created by the coronavirus. For all junior faculty, new work expectations together with added stress, family obligations, student crises have created major new challenges. Junior faculty's ability to complete their portfolios this summer and fall will also be impacted by the lack of availability of documents, absence of student evaluations, and for many also observations for spring 2020, by delays, postponements, cancellations, and things like conferences, peer review, publication. So the question is, how's the college planning to support and accommodate faculty seeking reappointment and tenure? And what changes, and some examples I put in the question: reduction of expectations, flexibility about deadlines, replacement of the portfolio with another document, things like that. Will the college be making to the faculty reappointment and tenure process? And I do want to stress that it's reappointment and tenure, because obviously we submit a yearly portfolio.
Thank you, sir. Mr. President.
The discussions that we have been having both locally and at the university-wide level have focused on providing maximum flexibility to faculty in these extraordinary times. So the extension of time, providing alternate measures for scholarship and research. The one thing I would, and I've said this to Jose Luis, and I've said this to our own provost, that I don't think any of us would accept a reduction in expectations. I mean, you know, what we require of faculty in the published criteria for appointment, reappointment, promotion, and tenure have been very carefully thought out and have been, I think, very fairly implemented on this campus. And our faculty are held to a very high standard, and I would expect that to continue. However, we do need to be as flexible as we can be with timelines and submissions so that faculty are not put at a disadvantage. And this is something, Professor Bernardini, that I, as the incoming PSC chapter chair, I would respectfully submit you may want to discuss with the incoming president in terms of, you know, flexibility for faculty. I have not heard at any level or at any time any reluctance to work aggressively with faculty, especially junior faculty, to have them complete their requirements to continue with us for as long as they elect to. What specific form that will take, I think will have to be worked through the governance structure, both at the department level and through the PMB.
Thank you, sir. Professor Bernardini, a follow-up? You have to unmute yourself here. There you go.
I am, okay, cool. So thank you so much for that answer. Yeah, I think it's completely understandable because our grids have been set They're obviously created by departments. They're voted on by the PMBs and the college-wide PMB. I just think as we look along, for example, when I think about our grids in the English department, you know, there are benchmarks along the way. It's not just kind of at the end of the 7 years. So it makes sense that we'd want to keep the expectations as they are, but also perhaps thinking about ways that grid might need to shift in some ways along the road to tenure based on the challenges faculty are facing. I heard that part of the question addressed. I'm just not sure to what extent you could answer the other part of the question, or maybe the specific form is what you were talking about with the portfolio. But the other part of the question was about perhaps rethinking faculty expectations for what they actually submit that gets reviewed by their PMBs and by the college-wide PMB. I don't know if that's what you were suggesting that we take up with the incoming president, but I was wondering if you had a response to that or if I just misunderstood your response.
No,
Thank you.
I think you addressed the question. And again, President Bernardini, we've had this conversation before about the dangers of having a president inject him or herself in departmental and academic decisions. What you are framing seems to be a logical step. That is, if we want to maintain the standards and the requirements that we have, but we recognize that they may have to be adjusted in terms of the timeline to permit them sufficient time to meet those requirements, then that is something that I believe, with the collaboration of the department chairs, the department PMBs, and the college-wide PMBs, can be reasonably accomplished without too much ado.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And thank you. Sir, Mr. President, I'm conscious of the time. It's 4:47. I will ask for a motion to extend the time with your permission. I hope you could stick around. You have a captive audience. And I do want to have some time for the floor, but I do want to get through support and consultation. And the students are starting to chime in with their questions, and I definitely want to give them time. So I'm going to ask everyone who's going to be speaking from now on to let us keep it brief so that we could get right to everything, everything that we can. So this is a question. Professor Vasquez Iscan, are you in the meeting? If so, please raise your hand. Okay, I will read the question on her behalf. She emailed it to me. I am concerned with the mental health of Hostos students who have experienced the loss of loved ones, illness, and/or loss of employment. What is Hostos and CUNY Central planning to do to address the mental well-being of students? Now, I think this might be opportune if you just take a number of these types of questions together, since they all touch on the same issue of student well-being. Professor Kennis, you are in this meeting. Could you raise your hand, sir? Okay. You have the floor. You want to read your question, and then I will move on to a couple of students.
Ernest, I don't have this.
I will do it. It's okay. Mr. President, the question that was going to come from Professor Jim Kennis is, how is the administration dealing with the realities that many students are still having difficulty with getting access to Wi-Fi and are having trouble feeling successful about finishing their courses because of their lack of technical skills and their learning style? How is the administration going to respond to this? For instance, is the president willing to spend money on tutors that can help students one-on-one, i.e. ARC students? And then, much to my joy, I have the outgoing president of the SGA and the incoming president of the SGA that pre-submitted questions. So, Mr. Pineda, could you use the raise your hand function so we can unmute you? Okay, sir, you have the floor, and then I will go next to this is our current SGA president, and then I will go to Muiz Agbaje. Go ahead, sir, you have the floor.
Hello and good afternoon, everybody. So I guess it's a two-part question that goes together. How are we planning to support the students? I know that we purchased some hotspots and we were giving away some laptops, but there's still a lot of students who didn't necessarily get one. Personally, I actually don't have internet in my house. So right now I'm using my iPad and I use a hotspot on my my phone. So when I lost, like, my office and everything else, it was a little bit difficult to adjust. So, as when we had our meeting, we allocated money for technology as well, but we're limited in that sense. So how are we going to be able to do that? And that ties into the question that Louise will be asking, but also like the mental support. I know that the counselor is still providing mental support, but the university student senate was actually discussing how do we go about possibly even moving towards nobody getting graded this semester because of the stresses that we endured during COVID. Personally, my mom was diagnosed. My little brother, my little sister, my big sister all live in a house with her, so they've been exposed, I'm assuming. I don't live with them, I live down here. So it's like in between trying to work, trying to survive in that stress, being president, and then also trying to keep up with my schoolwork, and then not having a certain access to a level of technology. It's a little bit stressful at times.
Thank you, Mr. Pineda, and for what it's worth, you're doing a great job. Mr. Agbaje, our incoming SGA president, you have the floor. You are unmuted.
Hi, everybody. Sorry for moving on. Hello, President Gómez. Hello, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. Thank you, Professor Yalango, for giving me this opportunity. I actually have a couple of questions. I don't know how you want me to do this. Do you want me to ask?
Just read them both out, and then in the interest of time, the president is making notes and he'll address them to the best of his abilities, but certainly this is not the end of our conversation.
Great. First I would like to talk about the budget, I guess, because I didn't know initially that, we done categorically, so I didn't know the budget questions were separated. So I'm just gonna have to take you back a little bit. And it's essentially about the reserve, the money in the reserve. I'm aware that at least $200 to close to $300,000 are from student activities that come from the reserve. And I would just like to know how much of that we would have access to, because to my best knowledge, I'm aware that we got a budget cut of close to $7,000. And with all due respect, the student activity money that comes from the student activity should go towards the student. So I want to know how we could take the money from the reserves that are from the student activity fees to help the students of the college for the summer semester and the fall semester, because as you know, this is a trying time, and we would have a lot to do as a school and as a family in Hostos. And I feel like we should be able to have access to that money, not just for the SGA, but in terms of providing funds to the college.
Hang on, sir. Mr. Agbaje, you're just breaking up a little bit. Go ahead.
So as if we do have access to the money, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, sir.
Right. So how would that money be dispensed that it wouldn't require financial aid? Because student activity fee is all money from the students, including the undocumented student. So I wouldn't want a situation where when we are dispersing this money, undocumented students that have paid student activity fee wouldn't have access to this fund. That would be my first question.
May I just ask that your second question is just the question? We have a lot more to cover, including student issues. Go ahead, sir.
So the second question is the question that I emailed you.
Yes, sir.
Which is while we're returning, when students, due to the obviously the pandemic, students that would probably take the credit or no credit deal that would probably fail classes or have dropped classes due to this pandemic, when they have to retake these classes, how is the college planning to help them financially? Like, would the students have to pay for these classes as well because they failed due to unforeseen circumstances? So would there be some sort of discount that the students could get, or would the students have to pay full money for these classes that they have to retake although it wasn't their choice to fill it.
Thank you, Mr. Agbaje. If you could just mute yourself as well for the meantime. Mr. President, if you'll indulge me, we have a couple of minutes left. I just want to make a motion to extend time.
Second.
Folks, we have the president. He's willing to stay. I know some of you need to go, but we have a lot of stuff to cover, and I know some people did not send in their stuff. I want to make a motion to extend our time to 5:30. Do I have a second? Somebody just use the raise your hand function. Okay, I see that. A senator, raise your hand. Oh, okay, many of you did. All right, now I'm going to clear all. Now I'm clearing all the hands. Stop raising your hands for a moment, please. Thank you. Now, at the bottom, next to the raise your hand function, the senators only, there should be a green button that says yes with a check mark in it. Please click that as a senator to accept the extension of time to 5:30. Okay, we're way past what we need. Mr. President, the floor is yours to answer those questions as you see fit in whatever order, and then we'll see what kind of follow-up, if any. And thank you for your time, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you for yours. Since by my count, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions and several sub-questions. Let me take them in the order in which I received them. And if I don't answer your question, I apologize. I'll be more than happy to follow up either via email or some other means. Difficulty in accessing Wi-Fi and difficulty with technology. The broader question is, we recognize, the college and the university, that access to Wi-Fi is a major problem, and the focus on getting computers out just highlighted the gap in terms of Wi-Fi technology. Our Hostos Foundation allocated $20,000 to acquire and distribute hotspots, and we have been trying to get them out to as many students as quickly as possible. And I know that the Chancellor is working with a number of providers to see what we can do to expand Wi-Fi access, especially in places like the Bronx that do not have the kind of Wi-Fi coverage, free or otherwise, that some of the other boroughs enjoy, unfortunately. But that's going to take some time, so our immediate response is to continue to acquire the hotspots, make them available to students for as long as they are enrolled. Having difficulty with the technology, again, this is where trying to provide some training for students in terms of accessing and using the available technology at a time when getting through to students alone is a difficult challenge, has been something that we're just going to have to work our way through. That gets us to, although only by implication, the issue of the credit, no credit option and what that will do for students in terms of their grades moving forward. I am not aware of any decision having been made about students retaking their classes and what they may or may not be required to pay for that. The position this college has taken, and I know that the Chancellor has been receptive, is to look to the maximum flexibility in terms of students making up coursework, getting grades that are more reflective of their ability as opposed to reflective of the current crisis. I want to remove from this discussion on the budget the issue of student reserve. Student activity fees and student fees in general are not part of the college's operating budget. So to answer the question to the President-elect, any accruals, fees, unspent dollars in student activities, with the exception of the mandate that the university recently issued to refund a portion the unused portion of student activity fees reverts back to the students to reallocate as they see fit. As to how that would be allocated, I think that's a discussion that should be taken up by the new student government, along with the leadership here at the college moving forward. That's about as quickly as I could answer a multitude of questions. And if I left anything out, please remind me.
Mr. Pineda, Mr. Agbaje, do you have a follow-up? Mr. Agbaje, let me just unmute you. Go ahead, sir, you have the floor. Accept the unmute, sir.
Yes,
There you go.
thank you. Thank you, President. I think that was as clear as possible. I just have two more questions, and
I'm sorry, a follow-up to the questions you asked. We have much more to go to.
Right. So as far as the questions that I asked, in terms of like you said, you don't have any idea as to the students that are going to be retaking the classes, what you would require those students to do for them to retake the classes. And then the question that I have is, going forward, like in the fall semester or the summer semester, I don't know, I think you are aware of the tuition hike that's coming in. How would that affect the students? Because right now in the USS, they are currently fighting for a tuition freeze, and I believe it will be voted on very soon. I want to know your stance on that and how that would affect us moving forward.
Thank you, sir. Mr. President.
I am not familiar with any specific proposal for the tuition hike. I know that that was discussed early on, long before this current crisis was upon us. My understanding, and this is where I think we're going to all need some clarity, is let us assume that the board approves a hike. The question then should be, if a student has to repeat coursework because of the current crisis, will they be subject to any increased costs? My hope is that the answer would be no, but that isn't a college decision. The imposition of fees, tuition, or any costs come from the board, not from the college. The feedback that I have gotten overall across the university has been to, especially in this crisis, to do everything within our power to hold students harmless. How that will be done is yet to be determined.
Thank you, sir. I want to move on to reopening the college now, and the question will go to the head of the HEO organization, Miss Yvette Lujando. If you could just raise your hand, ma'am, so I could unmute you using the blue raise your hand function. Oh, there you are. And you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President, how are you? So my question is, what health and safety experts will the college engage to evaluate whether it's safe enough for faculty and staff to return to work, and how will the results of their evaluation be shared with the college community?
Thank you.
Currently, my understanding is that the university will be contracting with independent evaluators. I am not qualified to speak to their methodology. I could only point to what we have done in the past when there were questions about air quality or anything else, that a contractor with the suitable credentials and skills is brought on board, acceptable to all parties, and that's usually done in collaboration with the PSC, and that those results, as we have done in the past, are widely circulated. If I sound like I'm hedging, the reason is, since we're dealing with a virus that people have very little experience, I'm not sure who those experts would be. I do know that we people both at CUNY Central and on staff here who are charged specifically with maintaining the health and safety of the college. But and I don't want to speak for them, but I do know that there are many unanswered questions about who can do that. When we had the threat of an infection here on campus, and we tried to secure certain companies, they were all committed in some cases for the next several months. So I think this is a broader question for the university. Who is qualified to do this? What are their credentials, and how can we maintain some degree of confidence, not just for the college community, but for those of us that are contracting with these companies to do this certification? And then to what level does that extend in terms of reopening? I am still unclear, and I have a call in to my colleague at SUNY Albany, since he is in one of those campuses that may be opening sooner than downstate. What will that look like? And again, I don't mean to be coy, but the opening of the college and what that means and when is still unclear. Opening for whom, opening by when, and under what circumstances. So the first part of your question is, do we plan to employ independent contractors to certify this? My understanding is that is the plan. Who will they be? I couldn't speak to that. And what methodology they would use is certainly beyond my level of expertise. But I do know that it's a university-wide priority, assuming that we get the authorization from the governor to proceed with at least phase 1, if not phase 2, of reopening. And that, I don't know when that would be coming.
Thank you. Ms. Lujando, a follow-up?
Yes, so my follow-up is until we have that evaluation and the okay that it is safe for staff to return, will you hopefully the next administration allow staff to continue to work remotely until there's evidence that it is safe for staff to return?
It would certainly be my intention from my discussions with Dr. De Filippis. I fully believe that she would intend to do the same. The policies that we would employ would be the same policies of the university. My discussions with the chancellor have indicated that the protocols for reopening and the protocols for bringing people back on campus would be based on 2 fundamental principles. One is the certification that the environment is safe to return to, and 2, that we have clear protocols on how we will function with social distancing, with the screening, whether it be temperature or anything else, as well as any required PPE if we were to do that. So there are several levels here, all of which have been discussed and will be part of the reopening if and when that decision is made.
Thank you, President.
Thank you, sir. There is an anonymous question that came in this category. You partly already covered it, but I'm just going to read out the question for you to pick out the stuff that requires further clarification. How will the college manage assessment of and reconfiguration of normally crowded public service spaces? For instance, the library, student support centers, faculty and staff offices, to comply with best practices for public health. This is assuming that we're back on campus. Who will conduct the assessment and planning? And how will the faculty and staff who work in these spaces be included in the process? How will the college seek out funding for the modification of spaces if necessary? A rather large question, but you see where it's going.
Well, again, first things first, the funding that could be made available for any intervention, whether it's a physical alteration, the purchasing of specific devices whether it be plexiglass partitions or whatever else, would be covered under the CARES Act under the COVID-19 response or expenses to the college. The greater question is the physical layout of the campus. It is what it is. We had this discussion with the library very early on. Even though there are large open spaces, the access to and the egress from the library is a choke point. The access to and the egress from the campus writ large is a choke point. If you have to get into an elevator with 10 other people, so we have to rethink the entire operation of the institution in light of whatever the health emergency is at that time. Again, I don't know when the governor will feel that it is safe to authorize a relaxing of the medical emergency or the state of emergency for downstate. But we have begun looking at the spaces. In fact, just today, I was shocked to find people from facilities knock on my door because I haven't seen anybody in a couple of weeks. And they were doing a survey of spaces. What would be required? How much space? How many people could we accommodate under the current social distancing guidelines? I know that the SVP had indicated to me that with the support of the university, they were inquiring about acquiring thermometers that would take the temperature of people if they come in so that we could screen whether or not people have a fever. So I think a lot of these things are already in the research phase. What it will look like, very much like the budget, depends on what the circumstances are at the time. So, you know, you could answer it in hypotheticals if you have all of the suppositions. How many people, what constitutes an opening, full, partial, what will we do? I have not heard a single member of the university or any of our elected officials suggest that any facility will be reopened without the appropriate steps being taken. And I would respectfully submit, since historically the educational and administrative patterns of the city university have closely followed the educational and administrative patterns of the DOE, that if the Board of Ed, as we used to call it fondly, does not reopen, that will have significant implications for the City University of New York.
I think that dovetails nicely into the consultation section, and we may have to extend time a little bit more to let people just speak from the floor. But the part of that question that I asked her that I want to reiterate, and who will conduct the assessment and planning, we can put that aside, but how will the faculty and staff who work in these spaces be included in the process? I think this leads into the consultation part, and there was a lot of questions regarding consultation. I cannot speak for other people. I speak for myself and the people that I'm close to. There is a general sense in the best intentions to do the best possible, to have the best possible result in an emergency situation with an ever-changing target of how much money we have and, you know, what's going to happen in this changing virus. But those on the ground that have to respond to these decisions are left at times confused, anxious, and quite frankly, feeling helpless, already feeling helpless to begin with, locked in our homes. So the inclusion of the faculty, staff, and of course the students who have to work in these reconfigured spaces, I would, and this is just a comment on my behalf as a faculty member, I think it is important that that is something that is part of the ongoing conversation through the summer, especially if we start online in the fall, but then move into face-to-face. And again, the task force that I mentioned earlier will make sure these voices are heard. So consultation. there's a lot here. So let me just pick something that is sort of illustrative. Wow. Okay. Professor Benchiveni, if you can just raise your hand, but I'm going to see if I can find you first. Oh, yeah, I found you. Mr. Benchiveni, I'm unmuting you. Now, your question, part of it in terms of courses and release time was already asked and answered, but I think your preliminary statement does speak to this issue of consultation, which you are at liberty to craft a question as you see fit, because I do think it's an important statement. Are you there, ma'am?
Yes.
Please, you have the floor.
Yes.
So if you want to read your statement and then craft a question as you see fit, or you may want to repeat your questions, but they have been raised.
Yeah, well, I think I will just keep my preliminary comment, which I actually think speak to some of the issues that have been already raised. So, President Gómez, you might be aware that in recent weeks, many faculty and staff have sent testimonials to the Chancellor and the Board of Trustees, expressing concerns about CUNY's approach to the pandemic crisis and the process through which decisions have been made and are being made. And what is interesting to me is that many of these testimonies have pointed out a very different narrative than what we are hearing from administrators. And one of the points that has been really put forth very clearly, especially by faculty, is that CUNY is actually in a unique position to be poised to respond to this crisis by actually maximizing its appeal to current and potential future students. Instead, what we have been hearing from colleges, including from you tonight, is this narrative of just planning for the worst, and I totally understand that, but the plan has been, for the most part, reducing class offerings, laying off adjuncts and other part-time. And this is not coming necessarily from you, but it is happening in other campuses. And eliminating reassigned times for coordinators, program directors, and other offices. So I'm sure I'm honestly just speaking for myself, but I think that I've heard this concern from other faculty. And as Professor Yalongo was mentioning, the concern is that many new mandates, many new policies, particularly with respect to academic matters, are happening and happening very rapidly, but with no opportunity for consultation with faculty members and for discussions. Some of them are clearly violating best governance practices and also are infringing upon the prerogatives of chairs and coordinators, as in the case of the scheduling of classes. So this is really not a question, but just kind of venting a little bit my frustration on the fact that as faculty, we're really finding ourselves responding to really a wave of policies that will really affect us, but on which we really have very little to contribute. And so if you could speak a little bit, maybe particularly with respect to the transition, as we're moving to a new college president, what is your advice for the new incoming president on how we can ensure that the college really moves in a direction that is going to be more inclusive and a little bit more, and they will allocate more time for this kind of really important discussions.
Thank you. And if you wouldn't, I'm just going to mute you, Professor Benchiveni. There's some background noise there. Thank you. Mr. President, you have the floor.
Okay. First and foremost, I cannot speak for what is happening on other campuses. Quite frankly, I have had my hands full with trying to manage my little corner of the South Bronx. So I trust that I have not contributed to either the angst or to that breach in any protocols. And I assume full responsibility for any breakdown in communication. It is ultimately my responsibility, but I would hope that people would understand that the last 2 months have been unique, to say the least. We've had to pivot very quickly, very often, as the Executive Committee of the Senate knows. I have been embarrassed by issuing a statement to find out later that that statement had to be revoked because either the circumstances had changed or had been a directive from either the mayor, the governor, or the university. So I think we were all trying to do our best. And if it broke down, it was certainly not any intention. As to any infringing on the prerogatives and the lack of consultation, again, regrettably, we've had to move very quickly, and that includes the chancellor and his staff without a blueprint for how to do this. And I think when we look back on it, myself included, I will see things that I did that I wish I had done differently, but I tried to act in the best interest of the college as expeditiously as possible. So ultimately, the responsibility falls exclusively and squarely on my shoulders. As to the incoming president, I have been in regular communication with Dr. DeFilippis, and I have shared with her to the best of my ability, the feedback that I have been getting. I have asked her and invited her to engage with the campus leadership, the Executive Committee of the Senate, the PSC, the chairs and coordinators, to get her own sense of what is going on. Fortunately for us, Daisy is an experienced administrator who has both more than a decade of experience as a sitting president and is one of our own, not just a former provost here at Hostos, but a longtime member of the CUNY family. My advice to her has been, what I've tried to do is to listen and be open, which I think is her natural predisposition. That has been her reputation wherever she has been. I have shared with her the discussions with the Executive Committee of the Senate about constituting bodies for consultation so that those discussions can continue. And as I shared with Professor Ilango when I spoke to Dr. DeFilippis, she felt that it wasn't big enough, that she wants to make it bigger. And my response to Daisy was, well, when you get here, you can do whatever you want. I believe that it is her intention to continue that. I will continue to share with her my view of what is going on here, especially in these unusual times. And I have not received any indication, not even the slightest hint, that she has any intention other than to ramp up that process. Unfortunately, as Daisy and I have been talking, I am trying to wind down my tenure here. She is trying to wind down her tenure at Naugatuck Valley Community College. And she has asked me to put off any discussions or interaction until after the 1st of June, which is perfectly understandable on both of our parts. And on a personal note, and I'm speaking not with Daisy's consent, but I have shared this with other people as well. She is an extraordinarily gracious and respectful woman, and she is trying to be respectful of the fact that until the 1st of August, I am still the president of this institution, and she is treading very, very lightly. And having served under a number of presidents, I will tell you that that is not a typical response. That kind of graciousness and courtesy is something that I deeply respect. For my part, I have said to Daisy, this is going to be your ship to steer very soon. So I want to work with you to make sure that whatever I can do to facilitate this transition will be my priority and focus for my remaining time here. And she has embraced that. So I am very, very encouraged by her openness to me, her respect for where I sit at this point historically, and her willingness to be open and collaborative in her management. Beyond that, again, I've known Daisy for many, many years. But as I said, working with someone is different than working for someone. We've been colleagues for a long time. She has her own style. And, you know, for those of you, you know, Philo is a fundamentally different human being and a fundamentally different administrative style than I have, and Daisy will be different still. But I think we will all and have tried to do what we think is in the best interest of the college.
A couple of things. Professor Benchiveni, I'll ask you for a follow-up if you have one. We are running out of time, but just to respond to the issue raised about this task force that the Senate is putting together, two things. When I informed the president the executive committee was putting together this task force, I was hoping for his buy-in, because these things never work unless people respond to your emails, and he was incredibly, as he has been with everything else, responsive to the notion of this kind of productive dialogue. But then he has gone out of his way to make sure that the executive committee, both with the task force and the SEC itself, has a pipeline to the new incoming president to smooth the transition as much as possible. So for that, I thank you. In terms of the size of the task force, well, that's the prerogative of the SEC, and we'll deal with that as and when the opportunity presents itself. Professor Benchiveni, would you like a follow-up? I do want to make a motion, and President, you've been incredibly gracious with your time. I would like to have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions from the floor. Would you be able to do so? You've been going nonstop. It's like a dissertation defense. I don't know how you haven't passed out yet.
Absolutely.
Okay. Senators only. A motion to extend time 15 minutes to 5:45. Senators only. Use the green yes button. Senators only. The green yes button. Okay, we've made it. Professor Benchiveni, would you like a follow-up comment or question to the comments by the president? I'm sorry, I seem to have locked you. Go ahead, or accept the unmute.
No, that's okay. I think we should move to other questions.
Thank you so much for your graciousness. All right, now I want to open up the floor to, if anybody would like to ask a question, use the blue raise your hand button. And also, if you're on the phone, remember you may email Professor Nguyen, and then she will text me who to recognize next, and then she will pay my phone bill. Her email, which I've lost. Nope, there it is. Her email is trnguyen@hostos.cuny.edu. I did get a private text from a student that wishes to remain anonymous, so I will just simply ask that question on her behalf. Where did she go? Okay. Oh, there she is. Okay. Or he. So, Mr. President, I'm just going to read out this question word for word on their behalf, the student, and feel free to comment as you see fit. Professors are forgetting that we are in the midst of a global pandemic and continue to overwork and it is very tedious to do the work and while they're grading. How are students to deal with professors that do not take into consideration the current events? I suppose the content of the question is, How do students respond to what they feel is a professor's inflexible adjustment to the new online learning environment that students had no choice but to engage in? You have the floor, sir.
First, let me apologize. The sun is setting and it's directly in my eyes. So I'm not grimacing, I'm squinting.
Noted for the record, sir.
This has been a challenge for all of us, and I'm not making excuses for faculty nor am I casting blame. I think, our faculty have always demanded a great deal of students, and our students have always risen to the challenge. My advice to any student or any member of our academic community who has a grievance is to bring it to forums like this. If you are a student, you could speak to your advisor, the vice president for student affairs, and the provost. The provost will speak to the chair. It has not been my experience, certainly here at Hostos, to characterize the faculty as being either insensitive, inconsiderate. And my experience has been that when we bring a concern to the faculty member, they make every effort to accommodate students. The biggest challenge now has been that even, communicating with one another when you're doing it in a virtual environment is itself difficult. So I would say, please feel free to openly and honestly express your concerns and know that they will be heard at the department level by the individual faculty member and certainly the administration. We will work to address these concerns and improve ourselves because it's important to us, and I include myself in that.
Thank you, sir. All right, we have some people that are in the participants list. Professor Nguyen, could you unmute yourself and just let me know what are we looking at in terms of emails? Sorry, I'm not sure. Sorry, I just muted you. Go ahead.
I have one so far that I'm texting to you.
Thank you for that. I believe Arena Rasco. Let me unmute you. You have the floor.
Hi, good afternoon. I am a COA in the admissions office. Hi, President. I hope all of you guys are well. My question is, I would like to know if it was possible to have a transfer of CUNY employees to the borough in which they live. So I live in Brooklyn and I commute to the Bronx every day. Sometimes it takes me a very long time and I'm concerned for my safety on MTA traveling over the average commuter, maybe an hour to 30 minutes every day, one way. And so I wanted to know if it was possible for employees to be transferred to the borough, to a college in the borough in which they live.
Thank you. Mr. President.
Yeah, I travel by public transportation to Kingsborough, an hour and 45 minutes from the Bronx for 28 years. So I know the toll that can take on you. I am not aware of any formal transfer initiative to realign staff. I can certainly talk to the Vice Chancellor. I think I'm assuming, because I know we have people who live in the Bronx that work in Brooklyn and vice versa, that there may be some incentives to create a realignment, but I do not have that at my fingertips. Let me look into that and see if anything is being considered. And if it's not, it's a suggestion that I can make on your behalf.
Ms. Roscoe, do you have a follow-up? Sorry, you are unmuted. Do you have a follow-up?
No, thank you. That was a great reply. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Lois Lang, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you so much. Mr. President, hope you are doing well.
Thank you. You as well.
I have a quick question about what the administration may be doing in terms of creating a physical distance for our students during the fall semester, at least when there is intention of partially reopening, regardless of the PPE and everything. We know that the physical distance is of utmost importance. The virus is here. It's not going to fly away anytime soon. So my concern is I can see classes size is still 28. I'm just wondering, is there a plan B in place until there's a vaccine or something that when the fall semester reopens, we know that we can safely practice physical distance, especially in the instruction hours that we have to have with our students if we need to be there physically.
Thank you. Mr. President.
The short answer to that is, depending on the phase that we find ourselves in, if this is a partial reopening that is for specific offices or personnel, we have been conducting from the onset an inventory of our spaces to see what can and cannot be done under the current physical distancing requirements, and have been acquiring, as I said earlier, equipment. Your point, however, is the challenging one. You know, places like elevators, common spaces, cafeteria, the classrooms themselves, how you constitute instruction in the current environment is something that is being discussed at the university level by all of the provosts. And my understanding is that that will be brought to the union as well in consultation, because, you know, let's be blunt. We've talked about consultation and discussion. If I were to propose that if you teach a 3-credit class, a faculty member should meet with 1/3 of their class 3 days, 1 day a week, and then provide distance learning instruction to the other third that wasn't there in person. We're talking about terms and conditions of employment. I'm now straying into pedagogy. So these are questions that have to be discussed at the highest levels. And as the PSC itself has called for, to ensure both equity and uniformity across the university, that we employ these practices and these standards consistently. If I'm going to do something different than Bronx Community is going to do, than Lehman is going to do, or BMCC, it is going to create some tensions that we all want to avoid. So again, the feedback I've gotten from Jose Luis Cruz, from the Chancellor himself, from our own provost, is that these things are all being investigated given the architectural requirements of our campus. And we all have the same problem, whether you're at BMCC, Hostos, Baruch. If you come into an urban campus, there are choke points where you are going to have large congregations of people, whether they be lobbies, elevators, or classrooms. And yes, there are thoughts about how to create social distance, but those thoughts are going to require consultation with the faculty to see if we can first ensure academic integrity and some legitimacy to our academic programs, and the health and safety of our community members. And I don't think that that's something that's going to be resolved on the fly, nor should it be.
Thank you. I want to use these last 5 minutes. I want to take the question that was texted to me, and then I'm going to recognize Professor August, who will ask her question. And then, sir, you'll have the final word. You'll just answer them both to the best of your ability. I'm not going to make a motion to extend our time. And if somebody else does, that's their prerogative. I will be voting for it. You've given us enough of your time, and people are, I think, tired. So the question from Professor Ridley, whether Hostos is using any of the skill sets of SPS for faculty training. We all know SPS is the online BA granting institution of the City University of New York. They do have a rather streamlined certification and training for online classes. Professor August, I'm going to unmute you. Please briefly ask your question so that the president may answer both questions, and then we may adjourn. You are unmuted, Professor August, and you have the floor.
Okay, this will be short. I'm following up on Dr. Damaris. It looks to me that Hostos has already locked itself into a situation where we will not be able to open in the fall. By closing classes and requiring large size classes, it will be impossible to socially distance as far as I can see. In my classes, even a third of the students would not be able to socially distance if I met them 3 times a week. So by putting sections on hold and keeping enrollment large, in spite of the fact that the UFS has already recommended lowering class sizes because of the difficulties of teaching online, as well as corresponding with students who are not familiar, I'm reading the stars that we're not opening in the fall. We can't possibly unless we have smaller class sizes.
Thank you, Professor August, and I'll see you at the UFS at 5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. President.
Okay. I could not give you the exact numbers, but I know that the School of Professional Studies and the University Provost has issued an open invitation to any and all faculty to participate in their training. And we have supplemented that with our own efforts here to try to ensure that as many faculty who are interested can participate. As to class size, the dilemma that we have is if we reduce the class size to 12 students to ensure that we could protect social distancing, then you would have to, just doing the basic arithmetic, offer 2,400 sections. At a time when our ability to cover the cost of the 1,200 sections is seriously in question. I would say, Professor August, your assessment is right on target, and this is where the competing interests of the budget and the pandemic are presenting particular challenges. Again, I don't profess, I've said publicly a number of times, I am not even the smartest of my mother's 7 children. So I'm not prepared to predict how this is going to play out, but I do know that the Chancellor and his entire team have committed to the safety of this university community. How we are going to do that in these challenging financial times is the great unanswered question.
The other question was how much of the SPS professionalism and experience are we using as we ramp up Hostos faculty to online teaching?
As I said, I'm not, I can check with the provost to see if she has any indication, or with Dean Modulescu to see if he can give me numbers of faculty that have registered. I know that the invitation was extended. How many availed themselves of it, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Okay, then. With that, we are amazingly right on time. So let me, first of all, on behalf of the Senate and the people that have come to this meeting, thank everyone in this virtual room for your attendance, your participation, your sending in the questions, and making this a phenomenally productive activity on behalf of the entire college. This has been recorded. I will distribute the video recording to the appropriate, the college. And so everyone has a record to go back to. If they have any questions, we will have minutes that are being transcribed by Professor Macri. My apologies to her. I'm sure she's smiling and grimacing as we speak. I am now going to unmute you all. I want to take this opportunity for us to all collectively, with a round of applause, congratulate each other for this incredible show of shared governance, and most importantly, thank our president for his 2 hours and 45 minutes in the middle of everything else he's doing. Here we go, everyone. Start clapping. Well done, everybody. Well done. Well done. I make a motion to adjourn this meeting. Do I have a second?
Just to see where she's at.
All in favor?
For this week.
All in favor? All right. Use that green button, folks. Use that green button. Use that green button to adjourn the meeting. The green button for senators. Well then, that looks like an overwhelming majority. Thank you all. I'm going off to my next meeting. Mr. President will be in touch. Goodbye, everyone. Take care. Take care, everybody. Take care. Thank you for coming. You've been fantastic. Thank you for coming.